Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this session. This is a session that's going to be looking at different educational research methodologies as a basis for international skills partnerships. My name is Emma Whitehead, and I am a skills advisor for the British Council. I'm based in London, in the UK, but I have responsibility for advising the East Asia region. So I work very closely with colleagues in Vietnam, China, Thailand, and I hope to be working more in other places like Indonesia, Malaysia in the future. Before I introduce more about the session, I just wanted to introduce Colin. Colin Forrest is an expert advisor for the Education and Training Foundation, which is a relatively new organisation in the UK. And perhaps, Colin, in a moment you can explain a bit more about what the Education and Training Foundation do. The purpose of this workshop will be to explore different research methodologies, as I say, that we think can support the impact of international skills partnerships, but also that could support the impact of individual teachers and trainers and colleges and schools and other education training providers. We want to understand, firstly, how they're used in the UK, but then also spend a bit of time thinking about the principles of them, how they can be implemented, and what some of the challenges could be of trying to implement them. And in order to help with that, we're going to give you an experience of trying out an action learning set. We'll explain in a moment more about what that is. And during that action learning set, we'll ask you to work in groups to work on a particular challenge that you're facing in relation to skills development and training. So if you could start to think now of what some of those challenges are that you might be able to use some of these methods to tackle, that will help when we come to the group activity. So the main purpose, as I say, is to explore how some of these ideas can be applied to the work that we do. So to explain what they are, I'm going to hand over to Colin.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming to this workshop. We feel it's the best workshop out of all of them. We certainly have the best translator, and it's very, very good to be working with Emma and the British Council here today. I'm a freelance researcher, but I'm here representing the Education and Training Foundation that is based in London, but it uses government money to support the further education and skills sector in the United Kingdom. And one of the pieces of work, the central piece of work perhaps, is this Commission on Adult Vocational Teaching and Learning. And that explores many of the principles we've been talking about over the last day and a half or so. And particularly it puts teaching and learning, but teaching at the heart of vocational excellence. And the Commission is about to report again in a couple of weeks on the progress of the report. And the Commissioners will see that excellence is defined by a clear line of sight to work, clear employability, not only in a vocational context, but also in the softer skills we've spoken about already today. And that means that teachers and employers have to have two complementary sets of skills. They have to be vocational experts, expert engineers, hairdressers, beauty therapists, etc. But they also have to be very good at teaching. They have to share that passion, that love of their vocational area effectively with young people and adults. So it's what we call a dual professionalism. We're also saying that to be excellent vocational teaching has to have very high quality industry standard facilities, cutting edge, up-to-date industry standard facilities, and also good progression pathways from young people at 11, 12, 13, 14, right through to 18, 19, higher apprenticeships and degrees. The Commission say that it's only deliverable through collaborative activity, this feature of excellence, vocational teaching. One individual, one leader, one organisation cannot do it by themselves. And communities of practice, and I'm using communities of practice in a technical term there, which is much, much bigger than just a mere group. Communities of practice are very, very important. It has to be applicable across a range of settings for different people, for different groups, for different subjects, etc. And it has to be based in solving real, live problems, reflecting on them, thinking about what works well, but more importantly, learning about mistakes. And mistakes, and I know I've made many of them, are so important. Not only so you don't make the same mistake again, but so you learn why it didn't work and take that learning forward. As we've heard this morning, technology is really, really important. A third aspect is another government-funded initiative called the Vocational Education Research Centre. Very, very new, and it's set up by the UK Department of Business, Innovation and Skills to looking at research in how it underpins vocational skills. Now, they use research in a slightly different way to the way that Emma and I may use it later on. And the research here is used in the context of influencing policy by publishing internationally in peer-reviewed journals where your research is subject to scrutiny by peers, and it's a joint venture between policymakers and the sector stakeholders. I've worked for many UK government departments, and there's a slight smile appearing on my face when I tell you that the policymakers listen to stakeholders. They may or may not, but friends from the UK may have a view on whether that's joined up. International dimension, very, very important. As I've said earlier, research is important, particularly looking at good practice. This research may have a strong academic flavour to it. It may be commissioned to universities. It may be hundreds of thousands of pounds, that sort of research. It may be academically scrutinised. It is research that is often done to people and organisations. We want to talk about different research methodologies during this morning's workshop. I'll just pause very, very quickly there to make sure and see if there are any questions about the UK's Commission for Vocational Teaching and Learning or this research centre. Irene.
I was wondering whether there was a contact person if one wanted to get in touch with this particular department. Yeah,
well, certainly you can get in touch through me. I can put you in touch. They are London-based. On the BIS website, you'll find details of it, and we might have included a link at the end. I think we might have. We're going to collect in your emails, if that's all right, to send you this presentation, so you should find it there. Any more questions? Okay, thank you very much. So, as Emma said at the beginning, we're going to talk about three approaches. You may well use these approaches already. Certainly, just in the workplace normally, you will do these things automatically. They are routine. They aren't intimidating. They are based on a personal approach for you and what works for your organisation. That doesn't mean that they're easy. They are very hard, as we'll perhaps experience a little later. It's not easy to do these things, but they are meant to be empowering. They aren't intimidating at all. They are about you, your organisation, and finding real solutions to the problems that you face. The first one I want to share with you is called action research. And action research is a very practically based tool. It is about work-based situations. You wouldn't tend to use action research for the sort of research we heard from Microsoft this morning. That wasn't action research, although the findings are relevant. It was done externally. It usually, not always, has a focus on teaching and learning, the activity that is central to educational providers, and also what we've heard is so important to forming these links with employability. It's normally small scale because it's intimate, it's personal. You own it, and it is cyclic. I'll explain about the cycle in a moment. It generates evidence. Now, in other sorts of research, a lot of academics place a high level of credibility on evidence. The evidence is tested thoroughly. Your peers give you a hard time over the evidence. People talk about validity and reliability. In the context of action research, evidence and validity if it feels right for you and your organisation. And there is a suite of resources that should give you confidence that that sort of evidence is okay to bring forward. Here's the cycle I told you about. The issue, the problem, is in the centre there. Another approach is called joint development practice. And in the UK, this has gained a lot of interest over the last 2 to 3 years. And this has at its centre mutual engagement, partnership, equal partners. So it's not about one person saying what is good, what is best. It is about ideas being shared equally. If you're not sharing ideas, it isn't joint development practice. Your partners are equal in this model. But I am particularly interested in this in the light of the Inspectorate in the UK. Some colleagues may have heard of Ofsted, the Ofsted for Standards in Education that works in the UK. They improve education in the UK. They do this by saying what works well. They define best practice. That isn't joint development practice. That model of saying what this is best practice requires others to move to that position. That is not what joint development practice is. Joint development practice is about the actual activity being developed and improved, not just transferred. It is quite challenging. It is quite difficult. It puts pressures on partners, but it will take you, I guarantee, to new and exciting places. It's like a marriage. It is hard work, but the rewards are very great indeed. So it isn't a passive activity. You are exchanging. It is an equal relationship, and without that exchange, the transfer won't work. It's not a one-way process. This, as I've said already, this is extremely challenging. It's challenging in terms of time, because you have to invest a lot of time in the relationships. You have to build up trust. You are opening yourself and your organisation to this mutual exchange. You are exposing your weaknesses as well as your strengths. You are completely transparent. But that is where the power of this approach lies. The final approach I want to talk to you about is action learning. And this relates perhaps a little bit more closely to the action research rather than the joint practice development. Action learning, or creating action learning sets, is a form of research. And remember, here we're talking about not research that is done to you, not research that is external to the organisation, not research where your story is written up by other people. This is research for you and your partners, and you can maximise the impact through this sort of research. This is about a group of people who meet not just once, but regularly. You keep in touch regularly. Daily would probably be too much. Weekly, maybe too much. Monthly, maybe about right. But you don't want to leave it too long. In this model, one person takes ownership of a problem or an issue that they need help with. The research element comes from other people challenging that person and their problem and helping them through questioning, trying to find a way forward. Those questions have to be difficult questions. As I said earlier, these aren't easy rides, these methodologies. Because they have partnership at their centre, like any partnership, they are challenging. So in this sort of group, the challenge on the other members of the group is to ask difficult questions. Questions like, well, why are you doing it like that? Why haven't you tried this? So in an action learning model, one person takes control of the problem and he or she is challenged by the others. So it doesn't have that mutual engagement that I spoke about earlier. But of course, what happens in an action learning set is that the members of the group take turns in owning that problem, in saying, okay, I've helped you with your problem, now you have to help me with mine. The strength of this approach of research is that you are using other people's expertise. The difficulty is, for it to work properly, you have to have challenges. You have to get into arguments. You have to make life difficult for each other. It is exactly like being a good teacher. You need to make your students feel uncomfortable. You need to push them. You need to stretch them. You need to challenge them. And that can feel quite difficult. So again, the point about trust and mutual respect and giving each other space are really, really important there. So I've very, very quickly, very quickly explored 3 models. These are models that Emma and I think are important in helping to support partnerships. They are research models, they are genuine research models, but they are research models where ownership is within the partnership rather than external. And we believe that they therefore can maximise impact from partnerships. So thank you for your time. I'll hand back to Emma now.
So I just wanted to, before we go into a group activity and try out action learning sets, I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the ways that we think this might apply to international skills partnerships. Now this diagram has got quite a lot on it. There is a copy on your tables, and as I say, we can send around these PowerPoints afterwards so that you can have a look in a bit more detail. I think one of the things that I took from this morning's talk from Microsoft was the fact that a lot of schools thought that they were implementing ICT well because they had the machines, and they were visited and they said, yeah, we have good use of ICT because they had the machines in the building. But actually, it's only when you start to look at the learning that young people had as a result of those machines that you could really start to understand what was happening. And I think a similar thing happens with international skills partnerships. We often hear a lot of incredibly exciting activity that's going on and very good things that are being delivered around things like developing new curriculum, developing new teaching approaches, developing new standards, new relationships with employers, and all these things are very positive. But like having computers in a building, unless you can look at the impact those things are actually having on learners, you don't know whether they're being used to their maximum potential, and you also don't know about any unintended consequences. Taking something that works well in one institution, in one country, and implanting it into another might have all sorts of unintended consequences. And as Colin said, we have a kind of ethical, moral duty to ensure that this one chance these young people are getting to have their education isn't being experimented with without us reflecting and looking at constantly adjusting what we're doing in the light of the evidence that we have. So to give some examples of the sorts of things we want to see happening, this diagram splits things out into the inputs that we might put into a partnership, the outcomes that might come from those inputs, but then trying to encourage people to think about the impact that that has, which Neil spoke about yesterday as the downstream impact. So some of the things that partnerships might do, that you might organise visits to exchange expertise or communication, setting up online platforms for communication and so on. You might have shared development of new innovations. You might share the development of capacity of teachers within different institutions. You might have exchanges, shadowing experiences. There's lots of different ways that partnerships might work. And what we hope will come from those in the first instance is this learning column. So we hope that in the first instance, everybody involved in these partnerships will learn. They'll learn new things, they'll learn new ideas, and they'll learn how to work collaboratively. The next important stage is that that learning is applied, so it gets turned into something tangible. And that is, as I say, things like the new curriculum, the new approaches, and those kinds of things. And we want to hear about those, we want to check that that's happening, we want to monitor that because that's very important. We also want those things to have a long-term benefit. We don't want them to just be one-off. So the next level is all about legacy impact, which is all about getting those things embedded into the systems of the school and even influencing more widely than that into the local or national approaches. But what we want to understand is whether each of these things lead to impact. Whether they actually lead to young people having increased skills, whether they actually learn to employers being able to find the young people that they want, and mostly importantly, whether they actually contribute to young people having the kind of stable and prosperous futures that we want for everybody. Now, that's a very grand aim. It's a very big thing, and it takes a very long time, as we heard yesterday, to track whether a young person is actually ending up in a job, is actually having a prosperous future. So what we want to think about is whether we can use some of these approaches around action learning and joint development practice to design ways of working that allow us to more personally and more iteratively just check that what we're doing is having the impact, reflecting on that and adjusting our path if it's not quite having the effect that we thought it was going to. So hopefully these diagrams might be useful in just thinking a little bit about the difference between what you might actually do, what you might actually deliver, and then what the impact of that is. So, to move on to the activity, what we'd like you to do, and perhaps this table could join with that table just to make slightly bigger groups, we would like you to have the experience of trying out an action learning set. We've got about 20 minutes to do this, so you might want to spend the whole 20 minutes on just one person, or we can tell you when 10 minutes is up and you can swap and choose another person. But we want you to choose one person to share a challenge that you face, and that could either be if you're currently in an international skills partnership and you want to share a challenge with that partnership, or it might be a more general challenge that you're facing in the work that you're doing in your day-to-day lives. As I say, because this is about a kind of personal experience, it should be a challenge that you personally are facing, something that keeps you awake at night worrying about how you're going to do your job. Then you're going to take it in turns in your groups to ask challenging questions. So the phrase that Colin used yesterday was about being a critical friend. So we don't want you to be so challenging that you're offending each other, but we want these questions to actually draw out some of the things behind that challenge and help people move beyond the feeling that they're stuck, that this has been going around in their heads for a long time. So ask questions about this. Searching questions that help them gain insights in order to reach some kind of a solution. And what we'd really like to see is whether any of these solutions could be using some of the research methodologies that we've talked about. After about 20 minutes, we'll have lots of time for feedback, or about 10 minutes for feedback, and I'm going to ask feedback on two things. So the first thing is, what was the experience like of trying to act like an action learning set? And then the second thing is what you actually decided would be a useful solution to your challenge. So as you're going through, think about how you're feeling during the experience of the action learning set, as well as what you're actually talking about. So I'll go back to that. As I say, on your tables there are copies of the diagram. There's also some copies of some kind of principles for how to work an action learning set, if you want to have a quick look at those first. And Colin and I will come round and help as well. Does anyone have any questions for everybody before we start? Okay, excellent. So off you go. Maybe introduce yourselves first, just on your tables.
Yeah. Sorry, we've all been working together for a bit, but you know me, Afshan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Walid. Yeah. Okay. So we had a discussion yesterday, which was in the afternoon session yesterday when we had each zone talking about, and we were talking about, our group was talking about impact and downstream impact, and we were having a discussion, because we were just happened to be on the same table, about the fact that some of the projects are education institute to education institute, and some of them are not. And so we were having a discussion about how some of this is adapted, for those different situations, and is it always relevant? And yeah, it will be relevant, but it will need adapting. So I think, I've done action research before because I'm a teacher trainer, and I've led on quality improvement work with LSIS. So I've done this kind of thing, and other different types of tools that do similar things, and I think they are good. And it was just kind of I think using the principles of this in a different environment would be something that I think might be
part of the evaluation exercise that we've done in North Africa last year. We went back over and did some evaluation with you and some of your colleagues and some of the other organisations over there as well. But that was an opportunity for Walid to talk to us about the impact that it had on his business, about the people beyond his business that it had an impact on as well. And it was also an opportunity for us to talk to Walid about the changes we've implemented as a result of working together as well. I think because we don't work at a sort of educational establishment level, and it's not so much about sharing techniques for delivery or for direct teaching or direct training. It's more about changing the sort of underpinning systems and the structures underneath things. Then I think something as formal as this is not necessarily the best way for us to do it. The joint development practice is much more like the sort of stuff that we do, and those sort of principles of each organisation developing their own approach to things, rather than saying this is as Colin. And I think a lot of people, when they start doing these international partnerships, have that idea in their head in that we operate this way in the UK, and so we'll bring everyone else in here and we'll show them how to do it, and they can go back and do it over there as well. That's, for me, it's never going to work.
Has helped to have those conversations when, and especially in an environment where perhaps a group isn't used to having that conversation. You know, we might be more used to it in the UK, talking through a problem, working it out, so it's been helpful. It has been helpful. You know, sector skills councils, which you know you guys are, is
that you're working at more of the sort of system level, but obviously you want to know the way.
There is a challenge.
Organisations is about employer engagement, I guess. So if we go to see Walid in Egypt, as we did when we first went over to Cairo, and we were trying to get together a group of employers so that we could talk to them about
partnership with several education institutions in the youth electronic engineering training.
Questions to help. I'll show you a picture.
Anh giải quyết vấn đề này.
So they challenge to.
Và tôi rất là muốn phát triển cái quan hệ lên, nhưng mà tôi đang bí rồi, không biết là làm thế nào. Mọi người có thể giúp cho tôi được cái việc đó.
Is this you? I'm here.
Developing our partnership with the other institutions. Education partnership with Frankfurt, in which they develop all đưa ra giải pháp cho anh mà sẽ đặt ra câu hỏi với anh cơ.
But to challenge his thinking.
Em nghĩ là trước tiên là anh phải quan tâm đến cái môi trường pháp lý trước tiên trong cái mối quan hệ. Tức là cái quan trọng nhất là
em xin lỗi như anh này bảo là anh phải đặt câu hỏi. Anh phải đặt câu hỏi chứ không phải đưa ra giải pháp ạ. Tức là đặt câu hỏi liên quan.
Anh đã nghiên cứu vấn đề pháp lý để xây dựng cái mối quan hệ đó chưa?
Have you studied, legal issues relating to building partnerships with
What would be the legal? I don't understand what you would have legal. We talk about where we make the partnership, relationship.
Nước cụ thể là do tổng cục nghề quản lý, nhưng mà quản lý chỉ 70%, thế còn 30% là tự do. Thế còn bên Frankfurt là bên Anh là 100% là các trường là tự do với doanh nghiệp.
70%.
Đúng. Vẫn là của mình.
This kind of activity where they are doing this research regularly and they are announced it. So this is the aim, but not yet reached.
I was interested in what you said about them, people worrying about what you're going to do with the information. Seeing it.
Yes, but it is you will not putting any direct information. You will not say that this company has this, but in total we have 200 labels. And also to justify why we are asking the government to start a new school for flexo printing, because we have this kind of machines, and these machines need for 200 graduates.
That they use as well, so there are those sorts.
And could it be that the engineering sector doesn't feel as worried about giving the information? I imagine print is going to have a lot of SMEs and one-man, and so they may be feeling more vulnerable, whereas engineering, I imagine, are bigger firms. So there is a culture thing.
Absolutely.
Because these are probably as well self-made. I know a little bit because I have my cousin in Tanzania who sells boxes and prints boxes and whatever. And he's very successful. He didn't go to school. He sort of fell into it and incredibly suspicious of.
We have a lot of
and I'm ready to sort of think about how we can take some of this forward after this. Got a few suggestions for further reading and so on as well. We might have a very quick look at a case study if we have time, but as I say, we want to go to lunch on time. So just to bring us back then to the questions that I thought we should feed back on, I wanted first of all to feedback on the experience of working in an action learning set and think about how that experience could be applied to an international collaboration context. We started in our group with a brief discussion about the fact that there are lots of different approaches, and sometimes this formal approach might not be appropriate, sometimes it might need to be adapted. And I think people who have experienced working in these sets within the UK will be aware that there would be other challenges with trying to have them across partnerships with people in different time zones, different languages and so on. So I think that's certainly something for us to think about. Another point that was raised is that these action learning sets often work best when you have people who don't know each other, who come back, they get to know each other by coming back each month, but they don't work in the same situation. So it doesn't just turn into a sort of friends and colleagues moaning about the things that they all share together. It has to be objective. And therefore, whether, again, thinking about international skills partnerships, having these action learning sets within your partnership might not be the right thing to do because you're all facing the same challenge. But whether there's something that we at the British Council could do to put partnerships, people working in partnerships, in touch with each other so that they can have this kind of approach is again something that I'll be taking away from this session and thinking about. So to stick then to this first question, I don't know whether, again, we have to use the microphone so that our interpreter can translate. Maybe we could start with my table at the front and just share a few thoughts that you had on how did you find the experience, how did you find sticking to the approach, what worked well and what was a challenge?
I've worked with Waleed from Egypt here. I'm Andy from ProSkills in the UK. We've had an international partnership where he works in the printing industry and he's been trying to get employers engaged with education in Egypt to improve the curricula and improve the development and make it more useful to the industry. We use this as our example to talk about. We have two colleagues from the UK here from colleges in London, so they have a very different perspective on things than we do as part of the infrastructure and the skills system. And one of the things that I found useful and one of the things that I've not got from exercises like this before is having people from external projects or other parallel projects coming in and giving their point of view about the problems that they've experienced and the ideas that they get from their problems as well. As Emma said, I think that these approaches work differently when you have almost objective people around the table and people from other projects rather than trying to do it within your own project. And the thing you said just now about bringing projects together in different regions, different countries, I think is a brilliant idea and exactly the sort of thing the British Council should be doing.
Were things that actually you already had within you, but I wonder how it felt for you to have all those questions.
Actually, it's a good experience to discuss like this when there is a problem and it's a specified point. It's not a general one, so you can get feedback from different culture or different organizations. This is great to discuss also with them further. We started with one point and then we build on it some other related problems. And it was good to get some answers from me. They are doing questions, but the questions for me at the end, it's like new information because the question make me think. What if we can do this in our business in Egypt? So it was a great experience.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Irene.
I'm from Harrow College in London, and it was, I forgot the point I was going to make. Oh yes, the point I was going to make is that I think the questions were very open questions. It was really hard to not jump in and say, you know what you should do is, and I just wanted to say that that takes a lot of thinking about, not jumping in with solutions, but asking the open, searching, exploring questions. Just wanted to make that point.
And I wanted to say two things. The fact that if we can get everyone to think that it's possible to use the method, we can make great strides into actually using the method in whatever context. And secondly, in asking questions of our colleagues, we are essentially asking questions of ourselves. And I'm going to take away quite a lot from the exercise, although it wasn't directed at my context.
Thank you, that's great.
We didn't really get to the questions on the board. We were more, we were more extemporaneous, exploring one gentleman's problem with partnering with some universities in the UK for skill set. You have a manufacturing facility, you want car parts, and there was something else. Electronic parts. He needs students to come out of the technical or vocational training to be better equipped to work the machines, understand the methodologies on how to work the machines properly. These are one of the things I've lived in Vietnam 7 years. I'm a university professor. My suggestion was that we have to go to the Ministry of Education and change some of the philosophies at the ministry. We're talking big scope, and he said, not such a big scope, but this is where we have to start. But to solve this gentleman's problem, we have to start educating the people from primary school up through high school on a thought process. I need to be able to solve problems, not read a book, regurgitate what's in the book, and that's the answers that most professors want to hear. I teach in my MBA courses, most of my students are Vietnamese. You need to find critical reasoning and thinking abilities to solve problems, and this is something that I think this gentleman is going to need from his international partnerships. And that's what international partnerships should bring. Capacity to think independently and critically to solve problems that aren't necessarily designed in a book, like a case study in my MBA programs. Mm-hmm. That's what we tried to discuss that he would have to need to try and find those international partners.
Mm-hmm. And so just in terms of the experience of working together, it sounds as if having different people focusing on one problem was useful, but that perhaps the whole approach that we suggested of sort of taking it in turns to ask questions didn't feel quite right in that situation. Is that a fair summary?
I would think that would already be fair. Fair assessment, yeah, of how we approached this problem. And a little bit of a language barrier as well, since he speaks Vietnamese only. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I think the ways that policy is developed, who you need to influence within any one system is going to be very different from country to country, and therefore who might be best to involve in some of these methods is going to be a key consideration, certainly in taking these forward. Just very, very quickly then, did anyone come up with any good solutions that they want to share before we move on to the final slides? No, wasn't long enough time.
Can I just reflect? My table was the one that misbehaved like yesterday. It was a very naughty table. But I think I learned a great deal, Emma, from this discussion, that these methodologies we've described are intimate, personal methodologies. They're not ones that are suitable to the big problems, the long-term problems. There was another problem, Emma, about in an employer-education relationship. The power was actually perhaps more with the employer because of the rapidly changing situation. It didn't feel like an equal partnership. The employers must be in the driving seat, and even the employers, the SMEs behave differently to large employers. So there are some solutions where we shouldn't be too brave at trying these out. They are for more intimate solutions where the rewards can be big but quick, within months or even a year. We're talking about systematic change, the Vietnamese education system, where we need strong evidence-based research, not this. So I learned that we have to be cautious. It feels a good way of working, but it perhaps lacks credibility with problem solving. And also the point about ownership. I feel these methodologies have to have a strong ownership and responsibility, but that's sometimes difficult in some policy where policy making is setting, and policymakers often run away from ownership and deny taking responsibility, etc., and that can derail solutions. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good set of thoughts to take forward for the rest of the day, because I think there's certainly something, as people come away from this conference, we've had a lot of big ideas, big discussions, big challenges. But actually, as we leave the seminar, we've all got to think about what actually is within our personal sphere of influence to make happen. What bit of it can we own and can do something quite intimate in terms of actually making happen. So that's a good thought to almost end with. But before we end, Colin, do you want to come and just explain the last few sources?
Thank you, Emma. When we see the slides, you'll be able to read about this, but I live near Bradford in the north of England. It is a dark and gloomy place where it snows a lot. But it is a very exciting place because India often comes to Bradford and Bradford often goes to India. And here is an example of where there is a genuine partnership, joint development is in practice around some of these issues. And here are some of the personalities. You see people are very good looking and handsome in Bradford. Here is some of the references. Here is the research centre I spoke about, very new government initiative, the vocational, adult vocational teaching and learning. In Birmingham, in England, a couple of weeks, there's a big conference about that. Some other sources there as well. Some more about joint development practice. You won't find this written about so much, I don't think, internationally, but I think it's a powerful approach. It is something I feel is quite empowering in challenging the dominance of policy makers. If you're in that game, or perhaps your job security is more important. Here are our contacts. Here, Emma and myself, and we'd be delighted to hear from you for going forward. So thank you so much for your time. You'll see a lot more of Emma later. Have we got time for some questions? Yeah? Oh, yes. Yes, if you could kindly write down your email addresses or leave your cards, we can share the slides with you. Okay? In terms of responsibility, if you disagree, they're Emma's ideas. However, if you think they're good ideas, we can amend. Okay.
So thank you all very much. As we say, if you write your email address down, we can share with you the PowerPoint and also the guidelines and the documents. That is it for this session. So we now have lunch. We have an hour and a quarter for lunch, so make the most of the huge range of options in the buffet. But we would like, at 1:30, we are hoping to have a photo of everybody who attended the conference. So we're hoping that people will please be back in time at 1:30 in the main conference plenary area so that we can take a photo from the stage of as many people as possible. So if you could be there on time, that'd be great. We'll just get you to wave. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.